Hello. So, once again, welcome to another edition of the Small Bear Show. I'm Alex S. Johnson, aka Small Bear, and there is an origin story to this that involves Michael Ritchie, the director of such films as The Bad News Bears. And he was one of my dad's best friends when he was growing up. They were in Boy Scouts together, and he and a guy named John Cordy were friends, and actually John Cordy worked on The Candidate, which is one of Michael's more famous movies, aside from like The Survivors and Fletch and The Golden Child with Eddie Murphy, right? So John Cordy was a friend of my mom's, and when I was born, Halloween Day, 1966, John Cordy and his wife Beulah Chang sent me a stuffed teddy bear, and I had a whole collection of teddy bears, but that was the king of the bears because it's like the Rolls Royce of teddy bears, right? And then John Cordy went on to make a movie with George Lucas called Caravan of Courage, an Ewok adventure, and that so which was based on the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and the story was written by George Lucas. So that's how I came about this my name, Small Bear, is this my weird family association with bears. So you got the Ewoks are basically just, they're bears, and the Bad News Bears is like iconic, right? And
Mhm.
I mean, like I always think of like that in Austin Powers, it's like, and that would be bad news bears for you, Walter Matthau, right? So anyway, that's the origin story in a nutshell, and I'm really amazed that I could actually burp that out. So our guest today is none other than Abigail Taylor, and she's had work in Writer's Digest. Man, that is badass because I grew up, reading Writer's Digest, right? I had I had a subscription to it, and when I was a little kid, I read all kinds of interviews with people like Stephen King. I was like, oh man, this is great stuff, right? So, Abigail F. Taylor is an award-winning writer with works in Fractured Lit, Globe Soup, Sixfold Magazine, Writer's Digest, see, the Writer's Digest, and Sentinel Press, among others. Her debut novella, The Night Begins, hit the shelves in 2023 from Luna Press Publishing, and her next two novels, Mary Neal, 1962, and A Hope in Tisho, uh, Tishomingo,
Shamingo, yeah.
Ishamingo will come out in 2025 and 2026 from Wild Ink Publishing. In her past life, she was a horse girl and theater kid and worked in the indie horror film spaces, which I really want to talk with you about because we have some friends. So I'll do a little song and dance, which will kind of bring you into focus as well. And talk about some indie film spaces, right? So we have actually a number of friends um, who are indie, you know, horror people, primarily. One of them is actually I'm really getting to know her, pretty well. With friendships, I go extremely slow, especially with people that I want to have long-term relationships with and as friends, colleagues. And one of these people is Nicole H. Six. Um, you may have heard of the band Motley Crue. Yeah, she is the daughter of Nikki Six from Motley Crue, but she's very much of her own person, and she's an actress. She's a screenwriter. She just recently came out with Demon Fever, right? And
Mhm.
she's an animal rights activist, works with stray cats in LA, and a novelist and a poet too. So she's the one who actually came up with the idea for doing an anthology for animal rights, which is called A Collective Paw. And it does come with a whole hand thing, where you and a squeezy, squeezy hugs as well, right? I'm such a dork, but it is what it is. And this, right, because neurodivergent, and I've always been this way, right? People like us, we got picked on a lot in school, right? And got canceled, and people just didn't understand us. I have a lot of friends who are autistic. Um, I think it's the honesty, which is sort of a dead giveaway. We're like we don't know how to tell lies, and we're sort of like just say things and that are horribly offensive to liars. Like, but that was you just made that up. Shocking, shocking. How dare you? A Collective Paw is swiftly becoming our flagship anthology. And I'll show the viewers all five of them. This is our book that we are promoting currently, and I'll just go through a few of our contributors. These are a few of our regular contributors. And if you're a horror fan, if you like, goth or dark wave music or any of that kind of stuff, you'll recognize some of these names. Um, One of the names is very famous, Poppy Z. Bright, now known as Billy Martin, the author of such classics as Lost Souls, Drawing Blood, Exquisite Corpse, and Swamp Fetus, and an old friend of mine, um, Caitlin R. Kiernan, two-time World Fantasy and Bram Stoker Award-winning author, considered by the New York Times to be one of our essential writers of dark fiction. Anna Taborska, five-time Bram Stoker Award nominee, Bram Stoker Award winner 2024. Is also one of the nicest people you will ever meet in your life. Lee Bales, who's our friend, is an award-winning filmmaker, also from England. Now lives in Sweden, and we're collaborating on some films. Actually, Lauren Soares, LL Soares, another Bram Stoker award-winning author, um, really cool guy. Tara Vanflower from the band Lycia, who also collaborated with a little known group called Typo Negative, and her fans include Trent Reznor. You know, um, uh, let's see who else. Benjamin Adams is nominated for Bram Stoker Award, and he's edited books for like Del Rey. You know, Jasper Bark, Splatterpunk award-winning author who is also nominated for a Bram Stoker and is gave us a what do you call it when it's not a it is exclusive story, an exclusive story. We got Lambda Literary Award um, winner and Yale University Medical School graduate um, and a collaborator with me, Small Bear, Jan Steckel. And these are just some of the contributors. So we are extremely queer friendly. We're extremely not condoning hate speech for sure, because that would be, you know, we'd basically just be like stabbing ourselves, in the face with a fork if we were to be like, oh, you're queer or you're neurodivergent or you're whatever, but you also support MAGA. Just stab yourself in the face with a fork. Right? Um, Another, our regular viewers are also our contributors. So they're like, yeah, yeah, we know about, okay, one of our authors that is, you know, I mean, if you've heard of the band Bauhaus and a little song called Bela Lugosi's Dead, David J. Haskins is one of our contributors. Jarbo, from Swans and sort of worked with everybody. Ellen Mabey. Ellen Mabey is one of my best friends. She's been in a film called Dancing with the Blue Iguana with some of the other people in the movie are Jennifer Tilly, Daryl Hannah. She was in a scene opposite Sandra Oh,
Mhm.
and she was hired to play herself, basically, and reading her own poetry. And her fans include, I don't know, a guy named Henry Rollins and, Jackson Brown and I'm very, very fortunate and privileged to be working with all of y'all. So I hope that I can bring you on board because it is, I hate when publishers say, "Oh, we're just a family," because it's like a family can really fuck you over. But, right, but I hope to be, a lot of our contributors are also people who are like, neurodivergent, like I said, and queer, like I said, and people who have overcome a lot of obstacles. And so I think that there's two responses to trauma. Either you become the abuser or you try to hammer out whatever kinks are in there so you can not repeat those behaviors. And it's really a lot of work, but I constantly working on myself. And I sort of, and I also have a brain disease. So it's like it's either that or, whatever. And anyway, so I welcome to the show, and I'm really, really, happy to have you. And I'm really glad that I went to the Ladies of Horror group on Facebook and said, if any of you want to be on my show, I have it every week, and it's kind of, otherwise we would be just like downtime, and I like to keep busy. So let's start out with talking about the um uh The Night Begins, which was came out
Okay.
in 2023 from Luna Press Publishing.
Yes.
Okay, tell me about
Okay. Well, it's about a college girl who is estranged from her mother after her mother allegedly killed her father.
that. Hmm.
Uh, and so let me Darcy, because I realized that the word sounded a little. So Darcy's mom allegedly killed Darcy's father.
Oh, okay.
But it's a case of no body, no crime. But in
Ooh,
the interim, Darcy's aunt took her away and raised her
okay.
because it was deemed that mom's not safe to be around. But
Yeah,
now Darcy's an adult and she's reconnecting with her mother, who has said, "Hey, you know what? I don't want to live out here in the middle of nowhere in the hill country. Come on down, help me pack, and I can move closer to you in the city." So she
yeah,
says, okay. So she goes down to help her mom pack up,
right.
but then she accidentally whistles at night. Specifically, she has her windows rolled down and she is playing Flo Rida's whistle song, and that
Uh-huh.
invokes the
Wait a
evil.
minute. So there's a whistle song.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but who is the whistler?
For the song,
Yeah.
it's Flo Rida.
Okay, because I have a distant cousin named Beck,
Uh-huh.
right? Beck Hansen, and he is on tour with another sort of like a of this woman, was it Molly Wilson or something, who was actually a really well-known whistler. Like that's what she does, and she has a family connection too. It's really weird how I have these. I'm literally cousins with Beck, and
Yeah,
he's on tour with a whistler. It's just like, how random is that, right?
that's so cool. Yeah,
Thank
just
you.
tell them not to do any of the whistling once the sun sets, because that's this my story actually comes off of kind of inspired by I watched a clip of Flo Rida doing his song uh at, in one of the at Navajo Nation, and he waited
Oh, nice.
until after the sun was set and started whistling, and everybody was like, "No!" Like,
Because does that bring like the Manitou, or does that bring like like the Wendigo or something or
Yeah, yeah. It brings in creatures who like to use skins and disguise themselves as different persons or different
skinwalkers.
animals and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you said it, not me. So
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, okay.
that's on you.
It,
Lock your doors tonight. I
are there
actually don't specifically name it in the book because I'm a little superstitious about giving it a hard name
Oh,
because
okay, okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, my
yeah, but I thought how about because the book is set in modern times, it's set right now,
right.
and I thought what we could talk about the ancient lore, but we can bring it to the modern setting and how convenient and obvious to me would it be that like somebody's just listening to a song that has no harm or anything. It's just a fun naughty song to dance to, but
Yeah.
it invokes a greater deeper thing, and she has to survive the night. So the big story is that she has to survive the night, trapped in the house with an axe murdering mother, or escape her mom to go into the woods where there's a skin stealing monster that's trying
Nice.
to get at her because she's whistled into the dark and like invoked. So
Wow.
that's my story.
Have you ever read M.R. James?
Possibly. You're gonna have to give me a title.
Okay, Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad, because that's
No.
you just
I'll have to put it on my list then.
okay. So have you ever seen the movie Night of the Demon?
No.
Okay, it's really it's like an OG like black and white horror film from like 1958,
Okay.
and it's by the guy who made Cat People, I believe.
Okay.
And it is just one of the most frightening movies you will ever watch because, well, it was remade as um, something to hell, the Sam Raimi film with
Oh, the Drag Me to Hell?
Drag Me to Hell. Yeah, it was remade as
Yeah.
Drag Me to Hell. Well, not really remade, but more like the same story inspired both movies.
Uh-huh.
And so that involves, so M.R. James has a story called Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad, which is just, he was like, he wrote like in the early 20th century, late 19th century. And these are not like, it's not like spider punk or anything like that, but it's much more, it's more terrifying than anything you'll read. And somebody like, obviously Peter Straub and Stephen King got a lot of,
Yeah.
inspiration from them. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think the most terrifying things are the things that continue to be unknown. Like even when you're staring at its face, you're not certain
Right.
what you're looking at. And
Exactly.
that's like and so you don't know how to like navigate your survival through it. And I think that's like one of the most terrifying things.
I, I,
Hitchcock did that
I
right
think
too. Hitchcock did a lot of his stuff where he said all the thrills and the monsters and the things were off camera, so you were never sure what was coming. And I think that's like a really effective way of doing old school horror.
old school horror is can be great.
Hmm.
I think like something like the Blair Witch Project proved that
Yeah.
you can really, a lot of just I love the way that kind of played off, real psychology where you can, just like you can scare yourself, into believing things, and especially one thing I've been thinking about a lot is how horror really taps into kind of our primordial child selves, and
Uh-huh.
it sort of addresses um, whatever strategies we developed as children are the same strategies that we're using today. Whether or not they're functional is another question because a lot of adults never develop those strategies. And I think some people who are drawn to horror are crazy, terrible people.
Mhm.
That's kind of almost like the elephant in the room as far as the horror genre, because you meet some of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. I've met like Edward Lee, total sweetie, you know,
Mhm.
um, most people are in our genre. Jeffrey Thomas, Caitlin R. Kiernan, Billy Martin are just, they're really cool people. They're really nice people. But then there have been some who've been, there's a guy who
Yeah.
was so, I don't know, mad at me for I don't know what, like he sent me 100 pack of razor blades. It was like, this is how you can kill yourself. And I was like, what? So it was actually this guy who founded a press called Psychotoxin Press, and he was hiding in plain sight for years. And he literally assaulted this couple at Scares for Care, scares that scares that care. And
Uh-huh.
so who had worked with him on his own as imprint editors on his own label. And it got so bad, this guy was, he was like literally assaulted them. And so Brian Keene, who's the founder of Scares That Care, is it Scares That Care? I guess, he had to like publicly ban this guy. He's the
Yeah.
same guy who sent me the razor blades. And when Brian Keene is publicly apologized on behalf of Scares That Care, and I was like, hey, that's really, really nice of you, but I don't expect you to be, you're not responsible for this person.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to go there, but it was
Oh,
traumatic as
no,
hell.
but
Yeah.
it's true. It's like you have people that are trying to work through their own fears and have such empathy and compassion. And then you have other people who are using it as a vehicle to exercise the things that society says that they shouldn't be doing.
That's
So
really
that
interesting and thoughtful. And I think there's a very profound kind of, you know, analogy that can be made to our current political climate, right? There are
yeah.
people who are actual monsters,
Hmm.
and you know um there was a really interesting, speaking of like horror and monsters and whatever, and finger pointing, there was a really, really fascinating panel discussion a number of years ago that had like Ramsey Campbell, Clive Barker. I forget those are the names that stand out because I'm a huge Ramsey Campbell fan. I mean, I think he's just, I mean, who doesn't love Ramsey? And I just like, and he's a big inspiration for me, a lot of people. And then, Clive Barker. And one thing that came up in this discussion was how there are almost like there's two different schools of horror. And I think it was Clive who talked about like right bank versus left bank horror. He said like left bank horror is basically where you identify with the monster who's been persecuted and oppressed, as in Nightbreed, for example. And then there's the right bank horror people who are sort of almost like the conservatives or the Republicans who are pointing the finger and saying, oh yeah, you're the whatever rapist or whatever, and you're the murderous rapist. Um, when they're the ones who are openly committing all these terrible crimes in
Yeah.
public, right?
Yeah.
And so with horror, I think it's fascinating that how we can really use it to help people, uh, you know, to kind of almost like psychotherapy.
Yeah. Yeah. Buying a book is definitely cheaper than therapy. Not
It is, and
that I'm saying that you have to choose between one or the other, but
no,
you
no,
can
right, right, right. That's
definitely.
that's very, 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 very good. And it's very wow, we're being so we're responsible. We're being
Yeah.
responsible adults. I never thought that the day would happen, that I would find myself talking about things like, what's important. I don't have any children, but if I would have these long talks with my dog, and I would be like, we know it's important responsibility, never thought I'd be that guy, right?
Right. Right. but yet here we are.
But but I think it's sort of like when you have an active imagination and you enjoy, as we do, just making things up to
Yeah.
mostly to amuse ourselves, that it can be helpful to other people. And then one thing I'm trying to do with a collective Paw and Nocturnicorn books is sort of like with the current political situation, especially, I want to almost be like an oasis where people can say, "Oh, yes, but there is an alternative." You know,
Hmm.
um, it's like when you see people who are that a lot of people in this in our community or whatever respect the hell out of names like Billy Martin and Caitlin R. Kiernan. They're certainly the most distinguished names in our field. When they see those people endorse us and they're working with us regularly, and it's sort of like it also, and also the idea that you too could be in an anthology with these people. You don't have to be, it's not like, and I really respect Ellen Datlow a lot, but we're not elitist, you know, and so one of the reasons I have do these shows is that like I have people who have, I took this one guy, John Sisson in Liverpool, and I kind of worked with him, and he was my, I mentored him, and then I put him in a book with, you know, the legends, and it worked. It just it just worked, and so I think that I'm babbling freely, um, but I've learned a lot from people, and one of the things that I've learned is that it's okay to be happy
Yeah.
too. It's all okay to be happy. It's okay to love yourself. It's okay to be, to even if you're disabled, you can have a righteous life and you can be attractive and brilliant and sexy and all these things are accessible to us, you know, and also it's the really cool kids are the ones that were beat up a lot.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
I think one of the great things about horror, if you watch a Stephen King movie or something, it's like, yeah, Carrie, man, or
Yeah.
or The Fury or something. You just see, misfits fighting back and having
Yeah.
these superpowers. Anyway, I'm babbling, but
Well,
you
we wouldn't have counterculture without misfits.
know,
So,
okay,
that's
right?
the whole, yeah. So we wouldn't have a bunch of art if it wasn't for misfits, people who didn't have a way to express themselves in like a normative kind of way. They went out of the box and out of society, and they figured out how to make it work, either for themselves or financially. But
Right. And it's
yeah.
also interesting to think about the fact that um one of the biggest horror tropes, that's been goes back centuries, is the haunted Indian burial ground trope.
Uh-huh.
And I think it was like, didn't they build the new sort of concentration camp in Florida on a literally on
Yeah.
sacred ground?
Yep. 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 So there's actually, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but I'm blanking on the author name, but there's a new book that came out at the top of this year or at the tail end of last year called Indian Burial Ground. And
Wow.
it's about a woman who is trying to get away from her family off of the res and to like start her own life, and she
Yeah.
keeps getting like sucked back in, and the horror kind of goes from there. So I haven't, it's on my TBR. I'm so excited, but I'm happy to see that like the trope is being reclaimed for indigenous stories for indigenous horror authors.
That's
So
so badass. I
yeah.
don't know if you've ever heard of a woman named Paula Gunn Allen. Um,
Uh-huh.
so, right, she was a really famous Native American writer and scholar, And say I did my MA thesis on Gloria Anzaldúa, the Chicana lesbian writer and activist and poet and whatever, who came up with, basically Borderlands theory, right? And
Uh-huh.
she died before I could interview her, but I did get a chance to interview Paula Gunn Allen, and who was also who was also a UFO abductee. And this is really interesting because there seemed to be a lot of overlap between like abductee experiences and Native Americans. And, I wasn't even going to go there, but there is a lot of UFO stuff involved too. And especially with my partner, Aaliyah Celeste Williams, is part Native American, and she's also like a ufologist. I wasn't even going to talk about the UFOs, but here we are.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, so but enough about, I don't know. I'm just trying to flow with things. So
yeah, no, you're
you are part Native American.
Yes, I am a proud 1/16.
Nice.
And not to get into the whole blood quantum thing is its own
Right.
breakdown and argument and discussion that should be discussed. But that is the joke that like everybody meets a white person who's like, oh yeah, I'm 1/16. My great grandmother was a Cherokee princess, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not Cherokee, I'm Choctaw.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit, I actually know who my cousins are.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
It's really kind of interesting how, like, both on a personal level and as well as a family level, and then and a tribal level, horror engages with these tropes that we're still working out, I think, as Americans, our primordial trauma that we've never
mhm,
fully addressed. Like, for example, Moby Dick, is one of my favorite novels, and the ship that the whaling ship is called the Pequod because one of the first things we did as the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the guy who Governor Winthrop, who came up with the famous City on a Hill speech,
mhm,
right? He was responsible for massacring the Pequod. And so
right.
that's why Melville named the Pequod what he did. And I think with, something like, The Shining, you've got that whole Indian burial ground
Yeah,
trope, poltergeist, right?
yeah,
It's just a recurring theme. What do you think that
yeah.
is?
Um, well, and I think I just thought of Amityville, the original Amityville horror too. They had that because the house was built on top of a burial ground as well. And I think there's a sense of in that story in particular, they talked about how enraged the person was.
Hmm.
And and all the a lot of other of the tropes, it just says, oh, that we've built on top of it, but they don't really go into the discussion of the rage and the like you've not only have you abducted our place and our existence, but you're also infringing upon our afterlife, so we cannot rest. Like there's
Yeah.
this, and so I think what a lot of authors, especially authors who are drawn to that trope, are trying to deal with their own maybe white guilt, of or feeling some sort of way about like how they ended up in the place they ended up at, but they keep the stories on their white centric characters, or
Hmm.
characters that are not indigenous, because they don't want to step into the voices that they're already taking so much of. But at the same time, there's this whole, it kind of falls into like the mythical Negro trope where it's
Oh
like
yeah, the magical
they
Negro. Yeah,
have to
yeah.
have like a lot of stories in particular. There's this whole idea that once the Native Americans stopped being savage and started becoming holy and separate, like a spiritual separateness from lived experiences, then I think a lot of horror authors in the 70s and the 60s, when that shift started to happen of the perspective of indigenous people, that they wanted to have something magical and something very Americana. And
Right.
so that's why there was so much, like, even Pet Cemetery.
Yeah.
Like, why does it have to be
Yeah, I know.
on tribal land? Why
It's
can't
so
it just be
corny.
like, right, like why can't it just be a normal pet cemetery
Yeah.
that there's ghosts on?
Right.
And so I think there's kind of some kind of subconscious and maybe more forward consciousness of a level of trying to like reconnect and say, hey, we acknowledge that like we've ruined this whole thing, and it's y'all's
Right.
turn to like seek revenge on these unsuspecting people who are reaping the benefits of their ancestors.
Oh, that's a
Um,
very interesting thesis.
but I don't think it's like ever like indigenous authors are addressing it more forwardly, but
Yeah.
with all the old tropes, I think they're just kind of touching on it like, oh, we know we did it, but not us, but we know we did it, but not us specifically, so that it's kind of trying to find like that middle ground.
Yeah, I
And
I think that was very thoughtful. That's very interesting. I mean, it's all this really good food for thought.
yeah,
There's one,
I think
yeah,
they've started moving away from that, especially in the bigger spheres,
yeah,
like in the early 2000s. But in indie author spaces, whenever I read a self-published horror or splatterpunk or whatever, it's still very a prominent thing. Like if we're going to do a splatterpunk western, there's always going to be like the burial ground or the sacred
guilty.
stuff, and I'm like,
Well,
y'all, come
yes.
on, let's
I
let's
wrote
elevate our
Bad
story.
Sunset, right? Bad Sunset, a splatter
Yeah.
Western. But, it did, to my credit, I'm actually a scholar of like that kind of thing. And my great grandfather was actually an American historian who named the Spanish borderlands Herbert Bolton. So one of the reasons that I chose that subject was because of Bolton, because
Uh-huh.
he kind of remapped American history from the Plymouth Rock thing to the more, hey, let's check out the archives in Mexico and maybe we can get more of an understanding about the interrelationship between the
Yeah.
Americas as opposed to like it's all being, like whatever the Puritans.
Yeah. I think too at this point, if we want to continue using those tropes, because there is something fun and engaging and very nostalgic about it, but we as authors have a responsibility to continue to improve upon it and to make it better, and not just to fall back on like, well, it's easy. And the way it's particularly, you have to be more socially conscious about it, but at the same time,
Yeah.
so much of our life and our livelihood is integrated with, it's like we live in it's like Spanglish but for
Yes.
existing.
Yeah.
I had somebody the other day said, I don't know if I've ever had Native American food, and I said, have you had corn? you know
Right. Maize. Right.
and
Yeah. Hello.
it's like it's just that we're at a level to where it's so much of our normal culture that we don't understand the roots or the
Yeah.
etymology of, so
Exactly.
that for authors who want to engage in that, you really have to be. I'm not saying no person who's not of indigenous is allowed to do certain XYZ, but you really have to be mindful
Yeah.
of how you go through it, and you have to be socially aware. And then you also have to decide, why am I the person to do this
Right.
story? Like, why does Pet Cemetery Steve have to
Yes.
have to be
Right.
on
Hey.
a thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus why it can't be a normal place.
So many things occur to me because I spent, actually, this is how I met my partner, Aaliyah, but in Reddit, and I just like, I don't know, it can be a time suck and hugely addictive, especially fighting with people that are just there to cause you,
Hmm.
just to be like the annoying 10-year-old brother, you know, it's just like they're there to be, dicks and there's you shouldn't it's like the third rail, man. You just like do not just walk away. But it's addictive and it's designed that way.
Yeah.
And so one of the spaces that one of my favorite Reddits is men writing women,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
as somebody who's all of my characters are women, and so I felt seen by that. But I also like, well, you know what? It depends. I mean, it depends on what gender you identify with as well, you know,
Yeah.
and gender is very, as you know, it's very extremely complex phenomena. And it's, I think that there's I would even enjoy, you know, hot takes or whatever that I would disagree with, because it was so much fun seeing, for example, people take that. And I think this one woman from Men Writing Women did like a 4.5 hour YouTube video on Stephen King, because there's so
Yeah.
much material there, like he's of his time. And what I think is really cool is that we can evolve. And I think of the example of, like, in horror films, for example, once Laura Mulvey, in her essay about the male gaze, like,
Hmm.
broke that open and made that available for horror people. And then theorists like the woman who wrote Men, Women, and Chainsaws, and it
Uh-huh.
kind of pushed the needle again. And so then you have consciously, you have people who, like the people who wrote Jennifer's Body, for example, right?
Yeah.
Re-encoding the male gaze and turning it inside out. And I think it's very healthy and positive for us to have these conversations and not get stuck in, like, pointing fingers at people and saying, "Oh, those, you're a sexist, you're whatever." Just okay, we're all fallible, but we it doesn't mean that we have to, you know, just you it doesn't mean that we cannot learn. It's just like we have to be a little bit humble.
Right. And then also it's about like, I could be so super interested in the Highlands, but I haven't lived that experience,
Right.
so I'm not going to be able to write Outlander the same way that like uh Garvin did, which he did like how many ever years of research to actually get into
Exactly.
that movie stuff. And so it's like if I just thought, oh, I like this idea, I'm going to do it, but I have no background knowledge or information, the art isn't going to do it justice in the way that it should. And so that's when,
Exactly.
like, as a creator, you have to say, okay, I have to step back and let other people who live in Scotland write their Scottish
Right.
horror, or who
Exactly.
have a special interest in it, do that, and then I can research it, and then I can do it as well, or I can just enjoy and I don't have to put my hat in the ring. So
Exactly. Exactly. I
yeah.
think that's really, really, really interesting. Yeah. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. Oh, I was going to ask you, because I'm okay, so this is something, it's very, since I kind of pulled away from social media for the most part, it's been a huge relief getting back to sanity. So
Uh-huh.
having opinions where you don't have to have a pitched battle and be canceled every time you open your mouth and just say what you honestly feel. But one of the things that I'm not a huge fan of, sensitivity readers. And
Uh-huh.
but I'm very curious to know what your feelings are about that.
I think they're important,
Okay.
and I think it goes back to it goes back to like your learned versus shared knowledge.
Okay.
For example, for my book Mary Neal, the artist, she's Alaskan for the book cover, and she presented me some 3 to 4 sketches with like color block ideas that she wanted.
Hmm.
Um, and one of them was the one of the characters, his hand was red with the blood. And I
Yeah.
said, Um, I I don't want that because that's a symbol for missing and murdered Indigenous
Oh,
women.
wow.
And
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
right, and this book isn't that. And she said, "Oh, didn't even think about it," but she knew what I was talking about. She was like, "Totally get it. Let's move on." Now, most of my audience that just wants a historical horror story
Yeah.
might not know that, but because my main character is a mixed person, those audience members who are looking for an indigenous character that they can identify with themselves, they're going to lock in on that the red hand and think, oh, she's going to be a missing and murdered person. And I wanted to make sure that, like, I have written stories about that, that I'm shopping around trying to find a home, but this
Yeah.
particular one is not. She's not that, and the story isn't about that. So in that sense, a sensitivity reader will do the exact same for a book, that somebody might have something placed in there that seems innocuous enough, but because of how it's attached to the rest of the story, it might become more prominent and more of an instigating point of discussion that it takes away from the story itself. And so I think sensitivity readers are there to make sure that, like, you're not going off based
Right.
in a direction that you didn't intend to. So
Okay. That's a very, very interesting, good and thoughtful point. One thing that's kind of controversial is that, like, you know, versions of classic books being rewritten to be more
yeah,
sensitive.
I that's where I draw the line. I think
Okay.
it's important to, especially as somebody who likes history. We have the classics because they're classics, but when they were written, they were contemporary. And so they're
Yes.
reflective of the mindset at the time. Even people who were abolitionists at the time,
Yeah.
uh, some of us would be like, wow, that was your way of thinking. That's not correct. But at the time, it was
Yeah.
very progressive.
Right.
And so we need to have these benchmarks to continue to exist. So I don't think to continue to exist as a society, if we're going to move forward and progress, we need to see how people thought and how we've evolved from that. But like, if you're just taking if you're sanitizing language that was used,
Yeah.
then you're not going to be aware of the full concept of why we exist now in 2025 because of thought processes that existed in the 40s and the 50s.
Yeah.
Like the heart is a lonely hunter is kind of like my fallback example for that, because Carson McCullers has two characters in there, an African American doctor and his daughter who's an activist, and they use language that we don't use today.
Yeah.
But um, he suggests that the term Negro is the more provocative and more instigating and slurred
Hmm.
language. And today we don't use it as much, but like by today's standards, when we talk about like the mythical Negro trope, or Negro, the
Right.
color as it translates in languages and things like that, that's kind of more of a more like, okay, we're talking about historical context versus the hard R. And
Right.
in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, his activist daughter saying, no, that's the worst term. We must
Right.
refer ourselves to the hard R because we're reclaiming and stuff. And that's kind of like a
Interesting.
reverse of where we are today.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so if we had sanitized that language, taken away like this Pulitzer Prize winning book that's so much
Right.
more than just one conversation.
Yeah.
But if we sanitize that, then we're not going to have the etymology of, oh, hey, this actually used to be said in a worse connotation than it's said today. And we wouldn't know that that was the case. So
Yeah. That's very, very interesting. And it kind of, reminds me of, or I've been thinking a lot about, like, I don't know why I've been thinking a lot about Terry B. Murphy, but for those of you who don't know who Terry B. Murphy is, she was a white woman. She's Italian, actually, heritage, and she was the first white girl rapper. and he was ever signed to, a major hip hop label with by Eazy-E from NWA. She was going out with Eazy-E at the time, and she her first album, The Power of a Woman, which came out in 1990, is still extremely good example of it's like genuine hip hop. I mean, as an art
Hmm.
form, she is right up there with Eminem. She's or Snoop Dogg or anybody.
Hmm.
And to me, that just shows the power of the just the form is just you can do anything. It doesn't matter what color you are, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But I've been listening to some of her earlier stuff, and she makes homophobic homophobic slurs, and she'll you know you know I won't repeat them, but and well, I mean, suggests that one of her rivals is a lesbian or something, like that's a bad thing, or whatever,
Yeah.
and or uses whatever, just homophobic slurs in her songs. And this is a woman who I like enormous respect for, because this is how she started out. She was able
Hmm.
to, you know, stand her own, as and in an extremely macho, extremely male dominated form, hip hop, gangster rap of all
Yeah.
things, right? And she was very, very, very strong. And then she became a metal person, and then she went back and forth, and now she's doing the rock and roll stuff, which with Sweet Evil, which I very much,
Hmm.
you know, um, I very much, would endorse and support, like you're listening to Sweet Evil, SWTEVL. Um, and why am I bringing this up? Well, because it's just an example of like somebody who is, a white person on using a form that's African American,
Yeah.
that goes back to African roots, and at the same time she's able to incorporate it into her own vernacular and make it her own, and respectfully and evolve too, and not using the same, being conscious and of, and on a kind of yeah, being conscious. You can, it's not the way that things, I've been in terrible situations on, in social media spaces where, people have ganged up on me and I've gotten canceled, and it's just horrible.
Hmm.
People said horrible things about me, and I was sort of like, well, I don't think it has to be that way. I think it's
Yeah.
kind of it gets so toxic. But like if we, for example, have respectful dialogue, and we can talk about, what do you think about, for example, sensitivity readers? And you gave me a different perspective than and with examples I wouldn't even think of.
I think part of the problem is that social media has become so chronically short form that it's
Yeah,
very difficult to like be able to bring in nuance. And then for even for an example, for me to say, oh, my thoughts were going so fast that I misspoke,
right.
because I was trying to get to this point, but I jumped the gun 2 sentences in this
Yeah,
point. Let me retract and like say,
right,
no, this is what I'm trying to say. And we can have that dialogue helps a lot better, because when you're having a discussion, somebody will say, well, no, what do you mean by that?
right.
And then like and then I can go, wait, what do you mean? What do I mean? Oh, this is, but with short
You're
form,
right, exactly. I left out
right.
point
Like if,
that point.
yeah,
Yeah,
if we have just only 30 seconds to stake a claim,
yeah,
you have to be very definitive, and there's
right.
no such thing as being definitive when in something is so malleable as the human existence. But even just going to your point about rap just being so homophobic at one point, like even shows that like Will and Grace,
Yeah,
half of their jokes are not going to land with today's
right.
audience.
Exactly.
And so like as you know, um it's just we have to take it and say, yeah, this is where it was at the time. Are the gay characters in Sex and the City were seen as really progressive, and
Right?
only 20 years later, it's like, ooh,
That was
that's
yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
so
Oh, yeah.
and so it doesn't take it, it takes just 20 years for stuff to shift.
Right.
But with having the classics and bought DVD box sets, we can look at it and say, oh, this is what was going on, and this is because before those shows,
Right.
how were we able to navigate through, queer characters? You
Exactly.
know, we had Rebel Without a Cause, where that whole queer story narrative is like buried under so much
Right?
subtext.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, talk about so let's you brought up one of my absolute favorite things to talk about. You know, queer queer tropes in horror, you know, so for example, and I've watched a lot of these, I'm kind of addicted to these videos about like, you know, queer history and I was actually interviewed by Stephanie Magister of Queer Voices, last year or whatever. So, have a whole dialogue about that because I'm friends with a lot of people. I mean, like, and it really has has shaped my perceptions and changed who I am to have known Poppy Zebright as a woman, to have
Hmm.
known Caitlin R. Kiernan at the beginning of her, which is like she has some voice work and she had, I think some facial stuff and whatever. She's just a beautiful woman, absolutely beautiful, beautiful woman. She kind of reminds me of Patricia Morrison from Sisters of Mercy.
Mm.
But and I still a lot of people in horror spaces are still catching up. So
Yeah.
people will tell me like in a kind of a judgmental finger wagging way. Well, do up, for example, somebody who's actually contributor and was in Weird Tales of all places, scolded me, messaged me and said, "Do you have permission from, William Martin, whatever, Jr., to dead name him?" And I'm like,
Hmm.
first of all, that's not his actual real name. It's Billy
Yeah.
Martin. Second of all, Poppy Z. Bright is a pen name.
Hmm.
So it's not a dead name. If I were to dead name, I would name Billy Melissa, right? Which I would not do because that would be just rude.
Right.
Why would I do that? But so people are kind of catching up. And I think one of the best things about the prominence of, Caitlin and Billy is just like they're heroes. And really that it's like, oh, one of the things that kind of keeps the toxicity going, I believe, is not knowing people who are transgender. When you actually know people, like
Hmm.
for example, Lyric Rivera, aka Neurodivergent Rebel, is a friend of mine, and I published them. And see, I had to catch myself. I had published them, Lasara Firefox Allen, right, the author of Genderqueer Menopause. It's a transgender, person. I have published them, right? And
Hmm.
if you know somebody, it completely changes the equation.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's my friend, I love this
Yeah.
person. And it just changes who you are.
Yeah, a lot of times when you're starting out as a reader and as an individual who's like exploring the thresholds of like what you want, you're meeting characters and people that you don't have a lived experience with.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's so important to have the representation as
Yeah.
well, which circles back to the whole, do we need sensitivity readers? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
if you're gonna create a transgender character, but you're not trans yourself, you want to make sure that the full representation is there, because podunk kid in the middle of nowhere is going
Right.
to be able to go to the library for the first time without their
Yeah.
parents breathing down their shoulder. And your character might be the first trans person that they meet. So you really want to make sure that you do it like right out the gate. You want to make sure that it's good.
I know,
So,
right? And I
yeah,
and I think that's a great example. And it's sort of like I'm so, you know, hey kids, it's okay to be happy. It's okay
yeah,
to love yourself, right? It's okay to
exactly.
be queer, for example.
Hmm.
You know, it's great. It's great. I think like one of the interesting things, talk about, queer coded characters in horror, for example, in horror films, some of some of, I think even unconsciously, the queer coded villains, for
Hmm.
example, Dracula
Yeah,
is an
yeah,
extremely seductive character. There was even a queer Nightmare on Elm Street,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Nightmare on Elm
Carmela
Street too.
is one of the first like uh lesbian vampires, Carmela,
Carmilla,
So
exactly.
yeah, but yeah, Disney has a long, long history of making their villains queer coded, and it's
Yeah.
very fascinating.
Like who was the character who was based on Divine? Like there's a
That's Ursula, the sea witch.
Ursula.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I love that so
So
much. I love that so much.
I do too. I think it's and that goes to show that there's so many people in the world that like how many queer identifying artists were working on The Little Mermaid. And so that was
Right.
like their one, like, let's have our representation. So, like, maybe the mom and dad and the family of four isn't going to know that that's divine, but people
Yeah.
who are part of the community, they know that that's divine.
Yeah,
And so that'll be our hand reaching out to say, hey, we see you.
exactly. Can we talk about Divine for a second? Because,
Sure,
okay,
absolutely.
so like, okay, one of the great things. So, I had a friend. We don't. I mean, I didn't really know her that well, but Susie Bright, aka Susie Sexpert, the author of, Susie Sexpert's Lesbian Sex World, and I have some science books by her. I never really thought, oh, I can't have friends who are lesbian, or I can't whatever. It's just like, yeah, this is awesome, awesome reading material. But anywho, uh, so where was I? So okay, so Susie Bright came up with the term gender fuck,
Uh-huh.
which is like, to me, describes somebody like divine to a T.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so is it she? Is it a drag queen? I don't know, man, but she's fabulous,
Yes.
right? Totally owns it, walks around with pride. Like you ever see Cry Baby with Johnny Depp,
Yes, yes, love
right?
Cry.
And Iggy
Such
Pop, and oh
classic.
my God, that
Yeah.
movie is so much fun with that former porn star, Tracy Lords, right? She's
Yes, yeah. I think that was her first time appearing as an adult woman
Yeah, it's an adult
on
woman, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And
because all of her other things it's
you're not
illegal
supposed
to
to have,
watch.
yeah.
So
I actually had, oh, this is, so I was in rock and roll for, I'm not going to tell that story. But I was in, so, people need to know, and I'll just say it because it's all out there anyway. I mean, people like
Mhm,
Steven Tyler, man, why
mhm.
he's why he's not behind bars, or, that guy Rodney Bingenheimer.
Yep,
You know what I mean? Why they're
yep,
like being actually having a friendship with Carrie Lee Chrome, actually getting the real story. It's much worse.
yeah,
It's much worse than it's been portrayed in the media. And the story is bad,
yeah, yeah.
right? But I was actually, I met Kim Fowley. I met him. I was introduced to him by a publicist who was just a big, big, big deal publicist who, was, you know, dated like Gene Simmons and what have you. And I was doing a book, an interview book at the time called Shock Opera. And I was introduced, hey, this is my friend Alex, this is Kim Fowley. And I was like, wow, you you know, he has he's bad vibes. He's really, really
Yeah.
bad vibes. And right away, and I was like, how do I get rid of this guy? Because oh, he was saying the worst things in public. And the first
Yeah.
thing he said was, because my friend introduced me as like, this is Alex Johnson. He's a journalist and he's writing a book about horror and music. And the first thing Kim Fowley said to me was, we want to talk about, horror and music, and you want to talk about sex with children. He sort of said the quiet part out loud
Yeah.
in crowd,
Yeah.
a crowd. And there was a guy named Alex Zander, who's the founder and editor of MK Ultra magazine. And I was like, Alex, what the fuck, man? What did Kim Fowley just say to me? He said, don't worry about it. Well, this
Hmm.
guy later, he and Sherry Curry, towards the end of who's MAGA is, you know, towards the end of Kim's life, they took care of him. It wasn't just like we're compassionate because I mean, I'm not, they're certainly not saints. So to me, that says, I mean, okay, you can be compassionate towards
Hmm.
somebody without, visiting a pedophile rapist,
Right.
when they're dying. It's like maybe karma should just, you
Yeah.
know, you know what I mean? It's like it
Yeah.
doesn't make you less of a person. And what I think really honestly, I can't believe I'm talking about this, but I think really honestly that Sherry Curry feels guilty. And that's why she was trying to rationalize in her head, well, if I, that somehow in some twisted way, that I can rationalize turning a blind eye to him raping Carrie Lee Crum and Jackie Fox
Hmm.
and her knowing about it and sitting on it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go there.
No, 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 but it's true. It's that whole rationalization brain is I had an author acquaintance who lived in the UK when the Prince Andrew stuff was first coming out.
Yeah,
And and I was like, look, we can talk about, not just Prince Andrew, but like all of our favorite British invasion bands if we want to get into it,
right.
because it needs to be addressed. And her response was, well, no, it doesn't because it's legal in the UK. And I'm thinking, ew, like
Right.
there's a point where there's like it's legal to do a lot of things,
You're right. Exactly.
but it doesn't mean that it's correct,
Exactly.
and we're seeing that today in
Right.
our culture, all the things that are legal to do but not correct to do.
Right.
And so it's like, we have to contend with that as people, like some of our favorite artists, some of our favorite writers,
Yep.
um, are hiding behind the thin veil of legality.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
I mean, like, marijuana is legal in some states,
Right.
but it wasn't 20 years ago. What's the difference?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
so
Exactly. That's a
yeah,
really, really good point. And I have to like admit, okay, so, I knew Lemmy Kilmister. Okay. So, talk about like, oh, right. But at the same time, Bowie too. Right.
yeah,
So, and,
and Iggy
Billy
Pop.
Martin, when you know, Bowie died, he didn't want to hear about, Bowie and underage girls. But because he said, well, I was quiet when you guys were all talking about Lemmy, and I'm thinking, well, what's wrong with admitting these
Yeah,
people were, did some bad shit? What's wrong with talking about it? What's wrong
yeah,
with saying, okay, you can still respect them as artists and at the same time you don't have to rationalize their behavior, which we consider to be, you don't have sex with, with people who aren't,
right.
emotionally developed. It has nothing to do with the legality of it. It's like, you could mess somebody up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you can mess people up in fully consensual adult relationships.
Right?
People who are in their 20s mess each other up all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, it's like and that's perfectly legal. So, of course, it's going to mess up somebody when the dynamic is so skewed.
You're right.
So,
Yeah. I just kind of I didn't mean to talk about that stuff and but so you know I'm gonna quickly scramble to safe ground here. We
okay.
haven't talked about we started talking about The Night Begins, then we led to all sorts of fascinating talks. So her next two novels, Mary Neal, 1962, and A Home in uh, uh, Tishomingo will
Go, yeah.
will come out in 2025 and 2026 from Wild Ink Publishing. So tell me about those novels.
So Mary Neal 1962 just came out. Sorry, 1963. I know what decade I wrote it. Mary Neal came out just this past June,
Right.
and it was my so I've been trying to break into traditional publishing for about since 2007,
Yeah.
and the whole saying of if the definition of insanity is if you keep repeating the same thing and it doesn't change, then that's insane. And so I was like, okay, it's now 2018 and well 2017, and I still so from for about 10 years I've been trying to do these stories and they haven't been hitting and I haven't been able to break in through the door. So let me just like reshift. And so I said, okay, I've been doing adult urban sci-fi.
Yeah.
So let me shift that. So let me try horror and then let me try young adult. And so that's kind of where the very beginnings of Mary Neal came from. And then I said, what do I want to see in a young adult book that I didn't
Right.
see when I was a kid? And that was my protagonist is I wanted um, Della is based off of my grandmother's appearance.
Oh,
And
interesting.
my grandmother is a mixed native girl, and she, in high school she was 6 feet tall. She was white passing, but she was in a town so small that everybody knew that she wasn't white.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see, like, we get representation of one side of the coin or the other side, but when I was younger, we didn't have representation of mixed heritage, and
Yeah.
so I wanted to see that.
Yeah.
And then from there, I was like, well, what are my favorite horrors? And I was looking at American Werewolf in London, the original Lon Chaney Wolfman. And so I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm a werewolf fan. I want Indigenous representation, and I want to have the growing up in a small town Americana experience as a young woman. And so that's kind of how that came together. But then nobody wanted that book. And so I
Right.
shelved it. And then that's when I wrote in 2020, I wrote I wrote The Night Begins. And I
Wow.
said, I'm done with agents. I'm just going to start going to publishers directly.
Yeah.
And so the first publisher I talked to said, this isn't, I wasn't sure if I could write horror, which is why I shelved Mary Neal.
Yeah.
Um, so I presented The Night Begins as dark fiction. And the first publisher said, this is actually horror, but here's a publisher that we know she's closed right now, but she's willing to
Right.
take you.
Oh,
So
wow.
they sent me to Luna Press, and that's
Nice.
how The Night Begin became
Yeah.
published. And now from that publication, it opened up the doors for me to seek other. I'm
Yeah.
still not like an agent, but
Right.
Mary
Yeah.
Neal kind of like so, but that was Mary Neal. And then A Home in Tishomingo is a story that I've wanted to write since I first decided I wanted to be an author when I was still in high school. But I knew I didn't have the tools in my toolbox to be able to write it well. A lot of it is based off of like my my family as a mixed Choctaw and Irish family growing up and surviving the Dust Bowl, and the using hoodoo, hillbilly witchcraft,
Hmm, nice.
and being a formidable Choctaw matriarch, and like how these two people can come together from opposing ends, and how they like the trickery, the rituals, the religion, and how they wanted to survive to make sure that their family made it through the worst hard time in American history, modern American history. And so that's a home in Tishomingo is inspired by my family as well, but it's more of sinners
Hmm.
kind of Southern Gothic, whereas Mary Neal is more classic monster small town
Nice.
America. So that's kind
Yeah.
of, but both of them are steeped in what does it mean to be mixed? What does it mean to be uh, in a small town trying to thrive?
You know what it just occurred to me, and this is totally out of the blue, and I don't know, it's a kind of a function of talking to you for some reason, is maybe we could just like I created a publishing imprint, maybe we could create a convention. I was just thinking that like as venerable as and hoary as an institution it is, HWA is deeply problematic. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that it has, I think it's kind of, and a lot of people have criticized it for this, including famously Brian Keene, that it's kind of a club. It's a you either, and I know people. I mean, the fact that Anna Taborska had to wait like 5 years to get a
Yeah,
Stoker win a Bram Stoker Award, um, is so, and that Poppy Bright doesn't have a Bram Stoker Award. It's insane.
yeah.
Well, is
It's
not
a
a member.
popularity contest a
You
lot.
know,
It's like you have to almost be a household name
yeah,
for your stuff to get going.
yeah, and so I was just thinking, well, we're talking about really, really cool and interesting topics, but what if there was sort of like Lilith Fair, you know,
Uh-huh.
or you had the Riot Girls, right? I'm a huge fan of Riot Girls. Like, what if we had a convention that was for, neurodivergent people, queer people, who would be accessible by anybody.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't have to belong to any of these groups, but it would be very friendly, and
Mhm.
and have panels, sort of like. I mean, like, just watching the Wakanda Forever movie, I'm thinking this is
Yeah.
a good example of what I'm talking about, right? Normalizing having brilliant black girls as your heroes, like it's a normal thing because they really
Yeah.
are, you know, and it's not as we were talking about the mythical Negro trope, right?
Yeah.
And
It's
the
that's the other thing too, is to have strong characters that are not atypical, but it's not a book about being a strong independent black woman. She just
right,
happens to
exactly,
be a strong
you know,
independent black. Yeah. And
yeah,
so yeah, with Mary Neal, she my
yeah,
character, it's a lot in the subtext. Della, she doesn't know she's mixed.
right,
Everybody else around town knows
right,
it,
exactly, yeah, yeah,
but it's not like a finger pointing thing for her. It's just part of who she is as a person and how
yeah.
people treat her as an whether or not they know her parents' heritage or not. And so I wanted to have somebody who I wanted to have more books that said, hey, we had, we are people that exist in the diaspora, and we want to do and fight crime and like save the day without
Yeah.
having it to be because I'm struggling as a minority. And so between the 10 years between of me writing that first draft and now it's, well, 8 years, but almost
Yeah,
10 years now, we've had so much open, which has been incredible. Like so many great authors who are better at it than I am have been able to create amazing, groundbreaking works like the Wakanda movies, to be able to
exactly.
have
Yeah.
that, you know,
I was
it's
just
great.
thinking, somebody should write a book called A Strong Independent Black Woman, just
I think well, there's Dear White People, the
dear
movie.
white people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So, but yeah, something in the same vein of that. There's also
Yeah.
the other black girl. The
Oh
other
wow.
black girl is really good, and
I
that's
I
kind of
need
the
to check that
Stepford.
out.
It's like a Stepford Wives, but in the
Uh,
publishing
oh,
industry, and
nice.
how like, she has to be the strong, independent, token black girl at the
Token black
publishing
girl,
house.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's so
yeah.
funny.
So,
Yeah. So I was just thinking because my flagship character, Candy Fontaine, Slutty Detective, is is a satire on the whole trope of like I mean, I guess Harley Quinn is the most conspicuous or notorious of this,
uh-huh.
you know, the in order to be like you can't be just a normal. I mean, there's so many just, and there's a lot of dumb shits, but just in any population group. But there's plenty of, you know, women who are of all races, I guess, or genders,
Hmm.
whatever, who are just really bright and nice people, you know.
Hmm.
And I I love like Anna Taborska. It's just a really normal person, really with her quirks and whatever. But and she's if you read her, you'd be like, why is Alex saying she's normal? But anyway, um, so my point is that um one of the things that always cracks me up is that I've been, observing this for a long time, and I think it kind of comes from like blaxploitation films. Like you have Pam Grier, and you always have like for that genre, it's very beloved right now because because they were and are so oppressed. And so, especially black women and black trans women, talk about like gynocide, whatever, but black women are traditionally oppressed. They get it, and if you're a black queer woman, even worse. But somebody like Pam Grier, everybody loves Pam Grier. Everybody is
Yeah.
like, whatever, she's so iconic. And I'm thinking, but there's some characters that really irritate the hell out of me. Harley Quinn. I'm like,
Mhm.
why can't you just be okay? So in order to be like, it's almost like um, in order to be an attractive, um, extremely intelligent, professional woman who's a superhero, you have to be, you know, who's also yeah. So you're hot, you're super smart, and you have a professional job, you have to be crazy as well. You
Yeah.
you can't just be we, why can't we normalize being an attractive, successful, intelligent
Yeah.
woman?
Yeah.
So
Without the insanity part.
without the insanity. And so or there's the whole thing of like I had a friend and I worked for this publishing company, this extreme indie, fringe indie publishing company that was based in Dallas Fort Worth, and the owner was just like a right wing, you know, wingnut. But
Hmm.
one of their authors wrote created this whole series that was about this hard ass, badass female detective who falls in love with her rapist, and I'm like,
Huh.
and she's supposed to, and you're like, huh, right. It's like, yeah, huh. And obviously he'd never like spent any time with police. He didn't know the first thing about policing. Also didn't seem to be intellectually curious about, learning about, rape procedures or,
Yeah.
whatever, rape kits or, so he had this characters who's this rape victim who's traumatized, and then his main character, his lead character, we're supposed to be to praise because she's a hard ass bitch, right? She's kind of
Hmm.
pretty much slapping the rape victim around, and like because this guy was literally pumping that. button that said, "Oh, in order to be in order to be good at your job as a professional, public servant, as a
Yeah.
police officer, and if you're a woman, you have to be hard as nails, you know, take no shit, and
Yeah.
be a psychopath." So,
Yeah.
so that was my direct inspiration for creating Candy Fontaine's slutty detective, who's absolutely amoral and, you know, occasionally transforms into a fire-breathing kaiju monster, because I'm like, okay, there has to be, I want to kill the trope of the hard as nails bitch who's,
Yeah.
who, like, I think it can be I'm surprised it hasn't been parodied more,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
and that's the thing too, is like we're women are tired of being hard as nails. We're tired.
right? You're
Let
tired,
us
right?
do something else.
Right, yeah. And I always think when I see these characters, I mean, Uma Thurman in Kill Bill is actually pretty cool,
Yeah.
but when I see these characters, I think, okay, so I always wanted to write a book where we see what they're doing on their off hours when they're not being hard as nails bitches,
Mhm.
where they're like, just taking care, like you have to, your washing machine breaks down, you have to go down
Yeah.
to the local laundromat and spend 5 hours with all of your laundry with people's kids running around and screaming and you know and your all of your stuff in these giant bags of laundry bags. Like that
Right.
is reality, and so I think it would be kind of funny if you had a character who only knows how to be a hard ass, whatever. And so they have like maladaptive responses to every situation, so they're down at the DMV, they're renewing their license, and they ask a simple question like, so if you're turning, you know, um, can you, under what conditions can you turn right on a red, for example? Uh,
Yeah.
can you turn right on a I mean, not turn right on a red, but you can turn right on a, I don't know. I'm neurodivergent as AF, so bad example. But a standard, question like,
Yeah.
what's the speed limit or whatever, what's the blood alcohol limit, for example, is that, and then your response is fuck you,
Yeah.
just like, and they go all gonzo, you know. So
There's this character. I think you would really appreciate her. It's on a channel on YouTube called Smosh, and it's
Smosh.
Smosh is great, but it's a bunch of improv and skits and gameplay and stuff.
Yeah.
But one of the actresses, Amanda, she has a character called Sarah Christ.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
and it's, I believe that's her name, but like she's basically just the inverted, she just plays so hard on this. Like I woke up at 5 a.m. and I gargled whiskey and I already smoked like 18 cigarettes, and she's
Nice.
always like greasy and covered in sweat, and somebody will be like, why don't you like Captain Crunch? And she'll have this whole backstory about like how like she was like held at gunpoint, blah 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 blah, and then that's why I don't eat
We've
Captain Crunch.
all known those people.
Yes.
Yep. But
Yeah.
I had a friend. Oh, I'm gonna tell you one of those I had a friend stories. I'll try to keep this compressed, but I had a friend who was a society um whose parents were extremely wealthy. They were society people in Pasadena. And she grew up in very, very entitled circumstances, never had to work a day in her life. Um, and, her parents bought her a $1 million house. But her fantasy, and she's actually one of the, talk about data points of,
Mhm.
what part of the origin story of Candy Fontaine's Slutty Detective is this woman. And so she would regularly go down to Hollywood and read at like places like L's Bar, which is a famous punk rock club in LA. and read her god awful poetry because her idea of a good poetry is basically she idolized Charles Bukowski in every
Right.
way and shape and form. And so like, being an abusive asshole drunk was her
Yeah.
idea of like, because we found out later that she's autistic. So she took
Uh-huh.
so literally. It's like, well, in order to be like a really hard ass, in order to be a good poet, you have to be a hard ass. And then
Right.
who's a famous hard ass poet? Oh, Charles Bukowski. And I'm literally in a book with Charles Bukowski. Um, called Prying. Anyway, I'm published
Right.
alongside Bukowski, but you can see the problematic side of this, you know, from miles away. So she would like write this. A lot of her poetry was basically like because she came up as a society, in like Pasadena society. She had no idea what a hard life was really all about. Like my friend Iris Berry, who I actually think is friends with her, but anyway, Iris Berry, you know, um, uh, came out of like ran away to Hollywood when she was like 13 years old, and she was a stripper and all this other stuff. But she really saw, and Carrie Lee Chrome and Joan Jett, and I don't know Joan Jett, but anyway, um, I'm adjacent, and
Yeah.
so these people actually had serious, you know, hard lives. Lydia Lunch, hardcore, and but this woman, she was raised in Pasadena, and her parents gave her everything, so she borrowed attitudes from other people, which I also think
Mhm.
is now kind of a very neurodivergent thing to do, right? And I'm really kind of trying to forgive her for being such a meanie to me. But so what's my point? Well, my point is most of her poems were bragging about how hard she was and how she like she wasn't just a precocious child. It's sort of like she had this one of her poems that she would read every time she dragged out her portfolio, which is like she would always have to read for 45 minutes. Again, very autistic, right? For 45 minutes, the same poems. And one of them was about how we are old at 20 and our hair is falling out because we use too much Aquanet, and then another one was like, I stand here with my fuck me red lipstick, and I'm like, and when I was five, I was reading Aeschylus and listening to Kiss albums, and it was sort of
Yeah.
like, so so she made such an impression upon me that I kind of stole part of her, as a
Yeah.
character, and I've incorporated her in various characters because I think she really wanted to be Lydia Lunch, Terry B. Murphy, um, and all these badass hardcore women, Iris Berry, but she just didn't have it. She didn't have it.
Yeah.
And she wanted to be, when you're growing up, like if you're entitled and privileged and middle class and white person, you sort of think, hey, what if, whoa, I don't, you know, what if I was like a gangster? What if I was like Snoop Dogg, or you kind of fantasize about that, It's
Yeah.
like, what if I was able to like credibly just throw down and lay down some rhymes,
Yeah.
and so
That's how the gangster and the Buttercream Gang. I don't know if you ever saw that.
I
Like it was
know
an after
I
series.
need to read that.
It's
I
a
mean, I need to see
horrible
that.
after school special. It came out of Utah in like the early 90s. It's so charming and endearing, but like the Buttercream Gang was like these kids, these do-gooder kids that helped out in the neighborhood, like if
Oh
old
wow.
Mrs. cousin had like broke her foot, so they would go do the grocery shopping for her,
Right.
that kind of thing. And the lead guy, he went off to Chicago to go live with a relative, and he came back like 6 months later as this hardened criminal.
Nice.
And it was like the most goofy, like Pee Wee Herman interpretation of
It's so
Gangster's
funny.
Paradise, like with his little bandana tied up, and he was like, "You don't know me," and
Do,
and so
do,
the whole show was about how to save him from becoming a gangsta.
that's so funny. Remember like what was that show that was it was almost um oh my God. So it's Saved by the Bell.
Yes, yeah,
Remember Saved by the Bell and the guy um something that the blonde kid
yeah,
who's
Zach,
there's a whole Zach.
yeah,
There's a whole thing about like I don't know if you've seen these, but there's
yeah,
somebody that you know what I'm talking about, right?
yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So it was like I would say take Saved by the Bell, but make it more Mormon,
Right,
and
more
then
movement.
and then that's the Buttercream Gang.
The Buttercream Gang. I'm
It's
almost like
just
in love with them
so
now.
yeah. It's there's something so charming about that whole. But it was supposed to be like you have to like be mindful, otherwise you're gonna end up doing drugs, and it was
Th-
just like
There was a, do you
the most.
remember Eight is Enough?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
so you remember that guy who later became like a super Christian weirdo um and with the like he has this like really high sort of squeaky voice and he sounds like Mickey Mouse and he's
yes,
and so he was like he goes off he's the rocker, right? So he goes off to Hollywood to find make his name or not in rock and roll. And then he becomes like just a few months and he becomes like this total like scumbag and he's just like
right.
horrible, right? He comes back and he's like he's talking about like women like yeah, all I want is like a nice little hard body and it's like whoa, dude, and another show that I had like as a guilty pleasure more than anything is Beverly Hills 90210. I
Uh-huh.
adored that show for probably for reasons that I think a lot of people love these shows both ironically and as guilty pleasures and they actually love them.
Yeah,
Like that show was so weird. I mean, Tori Spelling's character was almost
yeah,
like this dense clown or something. She didn't get anything. She was like, and she was completely different from Tori Spelling, and it was a real great acting job because
yeah,
she just plays this total dunce. It's like, and and that show was fascinating because it explored actual things actual life experiences, but from in a kind of almost like they processed all of the plots through this like pop culture leveling
yes,
machine where
yes,
everything has to be a cliche.
yes.
The guy is like the one of the main characters. Who is that? That
Luke
actor,
Perry.
Luke Perry, rest in peace,
Yeah,
right? Uh,
yeah,
he plays his name is literally Dylan McKay. His name is literally Dylan, right? And he's troubled. And whenever he was troubled, you knew that he was going to start to decompensate and maybe smoke a little weed because, you know, um, Losing My Religion by REM
yeah,
would come up on the soundtrack. And
yeah,
he'd be at the pool hall smoking. And I remember because it's so funny. It's like if you've ever known or been or any known actual druggies, whatever.
yeah,
Um, their version of drugs was sort of like he would say, there's this one scene where he's talking about how he nearly went over the edge, right? And he's saying
Yeah.
he's talking about nearly smoking a joint, and then he's saying, okay, oh my God, it's like there I was in my car, and I nearly had one lit, like,
Yeah.
I, oh, you almost smoked a joint, and that was supposed to make him like that was supposed to be knowing in reference to, smoking weed,
Yeah. Yeah, my favorite representations of early TV show, 21 Jump Street by far.
right?
All six seasons. Just so iconic how they handle the melodrama of drug use
Yes.
or um car racing even. Like there was one episode where they were trying to infiltrate a drag racing team and Johnny Depp, I don't know if you remember this, but Johnny Depp's character, he got mad because like the other teenager was like saying like, "Oh, your car sucks," and so like he revved his engine, and the kid that they were like, then they sped off, and the kid that he was racing got decapitated, and that's like the first 2 minutes
That's
of
that's almost like
an
South
hour long.
Park. It's South
Do
Park,
I?
That's South Park, you couldn't kill
Yeah,
Python, that's
yeah, but
hilarious.
it's just like there's something so funny about like the representation and how like Hollywood really like pigeonholed it into the most like going back to Saved by the Bell, the iconic caffeine pill addiction. You
Yes.
know?
Yes. It
Yeah,
was supposed to,
it's just the
because they
same.
couldn't make it speed, right? It
Yes,
had to be,
exactly,
you know,
exactly.
and when what's her name Elizabeth Berkley starts doing the like, what that
I'm
song, like,
so
I'm so
excited.
excited and I just get I'm so scared.
Yeah, yeah, it's so fun. It's so campy. It's so awful. But yeah, it's like, there's something so charming about like shows from then that
And
we
then
know we know better, but like just watching it unfold as fiction is incredible.
they would always have like the special. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I grew up like in the 70s, so they would always
Mhm.
have the special the special episode, right?
Yeah,
That for like different strokes. I mean, I
yeah,
love that show. And they had the episode where Willis and whatever his brother are like hit upon by child molesters, you know.
yeah, yeah.
And that
The bicycle episode.
the bicycle, right? And it was sort of
Yeah,
like it's so disturbing. I mean, it's so gross and awful, but at the same time, the way that um see, they were trying to press the whole stranger danger,
yeah.
thing, which was very popular in that era, which is the exact opposite of reality. And
Hmm.
so, like, and like a lot of those shows seem like perverted and just like wrong by today's standards. Like
Yeah.
people, I mean, I've graduated from being addicted to Reddit forums and watching a lot of YouTube videos about Saved by the Bell, for example. But
Yeah.
I really enjoy those. They're pretty much guilty pleasures.
Yeah.
And just those the 70s, the 70s were a treasure trove of tropes of just, you know, everything you can think of, but mainly around things like race, around drugs, around sexuality, around disability, and talk about exceptionalism and having characters who are the token whatever. Oh yeah, I was remembering the episode of Saved by the Bell where Zach discovers that he's partially Native American and
Yeah.
he shows up with a full headdress and I'm like, this is so offensive.
Right.
It's just ridiculous, you know. He's this
It's so,
blonde
and
guy.
it's one of those things too where the actor, he's half Filipino. So
Right,
it's like why couldn't they have used that opportunity to
right.
discuss
Yeah,
about being Filipino,
right.
Like why does it have to be and I guess they were trying to hit off the fact that he's such a classic American golden boy that he's so American that he is from the original Americans. as the only thing
That's
that I
so
could think
funny. It's
of.
like he's so
But
Americana that
yeah,
he's almost like practically a native Americana,
yeah, yeah.
He's a native Americana.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
it's, like today, by today's standards, I would love a kind of Saved by the Bells where they actually have the actors, if they wanted to do the heritage thing, because everybody in high school did their family tree heritage stuff.
right. Yeah,
Um, so like if to have the actors, it's like, oh, hey, if you're actually Norwegian or you're actually Filipino
yeah,
or you're like part Japanese or whatever, because America is all about being, and I think more so than any other country, America has always been about like, oh, what's your heritage? Like I'm
yeah,
Irish, I'm
yeah,
Italian, and that's because we're a nation of immigrants. And so we're trying to signal to relatives, oh, you're
right.
my cousin from then. And so that's why we have an obsession with it, more so than other nations, because they came to us instead of us going to them. But like
Yeah.
we do need to have like, let's have more authenticity in it instead
You
of
know
like
that
just
that kind of reminds me of something because I told you that, Beck Hansen is my cousin. Well, that's
Mhm,
literally true, but his mother, who's also my cousin, is Bibi Hansen, the Andy Warhol superstar, right?
mhm,
And um, one of the reasons why it doesn't really matter whether we're literally 23andMe cousins is that Bibi says I'm her cousin. And she was kind of brought into the fold of the Warhol factory scene when she was a kid. And I just now I'm kind of connecting the dots because here you have Andy Warhol, talk about, immigrant,
yeah,
right? He's a Polish guy, and I think he lived with his aunt or something for like, until he was really in his late 20s or something like that. And he was also like very, had a really bad skin condition. He thought he was ugly. And so he
mhm,
kind of, he, you know, for this guy who's is a classic American success story because he really not only did he kind of fashion his own cool. I mean, he sort of
yeah,
cool branded himself. He cool branded reality. I mean, he's sort of
yeah,
responsible for the whole idea that now everybody can feel like, oh, I have a brand. You have the Abigail, Taylor brand, you have the Alex S. Johnson brand, whatever. And we
mhm,
consciously, regular people, think of ourselves as like, how do we tweak our brand to ensure hits and engagement, right? And
yeah,
and um, and so I just put that together. So what Bibby was really telling me is that like it doesn't because we're family in the sense that of the Andy Warhol sense that you can be a superstar. And I have a friend who's contributor to the Bowie book, Hannah Breshard,
mhm,
who's best known for still for being in the movie Cracked Actor, where she says, I'm a space cadet and David Bowie's my commander, right? And
right,
I was talking, I was saying, Hannah, you're a legend and Bibby's a legend and whatever, and David J. Haskins, we have David J. in the book. And she said, Alex, you're a legend. And I was like, oh wow, cool. We can be legends together. Yay. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about if I want to praise myself, but it's really Nocturnicorn Books is much larger than me. It's become sort
mhm,
of like, hey, there's a party with people you thought were elite and exclusive. Hey, guess what?
yeah,
They can be your friends too. You can be in a
yeah,
book with them. You don't have to pass, you can completely bypass the gatekeepers who don't count at the bottom, and just come to the party,
yeah, exactly,
right?
exactly, yeah. I think that's what's so great about art and literature and things like that is that uh, you just have, it brings so many people together from so many different backgrounds.
Yeah,
And it's just really, it makes everything inclusive, or it should make everything inclusive.
right.
Because there be people that I will like a John Ford film for an
Exactly.
entirely different reason than somebody else.
Yeah,
but we still both like,
right.
a John Ford film.
Exactly.
And I'm not the target audience for that, but I can still appreciate it and talk to somebody who is, and that's what art is supposed to do. So it's
Yeah,
supposed to
yeah.
unify us as a family.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, John Ford, I took actually a community college um, class in history of film, and we really went over all these films like On the Waterfront, Trip to the Moon,
Mhm.
etc., in fine grain detail, and sort of, and got and now I understand how the whole vocabulary of cinema was really developed by people like John Ford
Yeah,
in Stagecoach, for example, those pan shots and the whatever.
yeah,
But somebody had to create that.
yeah. Like, without the searchers, we wouldn't have Star Wars and we wouldn't have Jurassic Park and we wouldn't have everything Martin Scorsese has ever
Right.
done. And that's
Yeah,
just because of like one person who fell in love with the Utah-Texas border,
exactly. It,
And
yeah.
yeah.
I have okay, so one of my, it always sounds like I always feel like the compulsive liar guy, John Levitt's, that character. Because when I say things like this, I'm about to say. So I have a friend who's this is how it always starts, right? I have this friend whose name is Leslie Spivey,
Hmm.
and she was in a band called Penis Flytrap. Yeah, chuckle, chuckle. Yeah, Penis Flytrap. But the lead singer was Dinah Cancer from the band 45 Grave. And people don't know. It's horror fans should know, a little movie called Return of the Living Dead, right? Party
Right.
Time, right? And so Dinah is, it's not a real name, obviously, but she's hella cool, and 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 their bass player, Lucifer Fulci, David St. Airy, whatever, is also a
Mhm.
good friend of mine, and he's also in the Black Sabbath book. But Leslie was their guitarist, was friends with Kenneth Anger, and she lived with Kenneth Anger and for like 25 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
heavy. And
Yeah.
Ken Anger was the guy who inspired Martin Scorsese, inspired John Waters. You
Yeah.
ever see that movie Cecil B. Demented, where they're all like, you know that movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know
I,
what I'm
I
talking
haven't
about.
seen it, but I do know the movie that you're talking about.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. And so we did this, and it's available on YouTube if you want to check it out, just the audio of me and Leslie talking. But these people, like, I'll say they also were friends with Bobby Beausoleil. So so they were constantly, there's all these interesting, fascinating connections. So Nicole H. Six, right? Daughter of Nikki Six, Motley Crue, um, is friends with Sharon Michelle LeVay, Miskael LeVay, who's the head of the International Church of Satan, is also a friend of mine.
Hmm.
And she met Leslie Spivey, Ivorian von Spivey, through her late husband, Stanton LeVay, who was, I believe, the grandson of Anton LeVay, the founder of the Church of Satan. Well,
Yeah.
Bobby Beausoleil and John and Kenneth Anger were friends with Anton LaVey, but uh, Kenneth Anger was friends with Aleister Crowley, right?
That's so
And
wild.
then
Yeah.
as in Mr. Crowley,
Yeah.
and then Bobby Beausoleil uh, did the music for the movie Lucifer Rising after a certain Jimmy Page flaked out and only gave Anger about 20 minutes. So he laid a curse on him, which might or may not explain the whole, you know, Led Zeppelin curse,
Yeah.
right? And so, and as Leslie's telling me these things, I'm like,
Right.
but but that, Also, uh, uh, Bobby Beausoleil later went on to, become a famous murderer with the Manson family, who are
You
also
know.
friends with Sharon LeVay. So she was telling me like she was, she's really interesting person. Just and she was messaged me. She messaged me at the most like uncanny times. Like she and Nicole will message me exactly the same time. And
Mhm.
I'd be like, okay, so Nicole H6 and Sharon LeVay are messaging me exactly the same time, like their periods were synchronized or something.
Yeah,
And and
yeah,
then and then Sharon was saying, oh yeah, I'm going to be spending some time with the Manson family. But she means the Manson family, like the literal son
yeah,
of Charles Manson. So
yeah.
it's bizarre that
That
in
is
my life,
wild.
I kind of normalized being friends with people who are associated with iconic evil, but at
Yeah,
the same time, they're kind of charming,
yeah. Nicest people in the world.
right? I mean, apparently, um, Charlie Manson's son is a really nice guy and has nothing to do with,
Yeah,
and I think that they have evolved from the Church of Satan, certainly, has kind of, it's not your grandparents' Church of Satan. It's a lot
yeah,
more chill, and they're not like, I don't know. The whole thing with the curses kind of freaked
yeah.
me out.
You got to be careful with people who engage in that sort of deal because you never know. You can't piss them off.
You can't piss them off, but at the same time, it's really powerful.
Yeah. No,
When
there's a lot to be said about just people who engage in certain practices that they're tapping into a side of just living that so much of white bread milk toast America has forgotten. Well, not just America, but westernized ideas. Like you can take the people will talk about witchcraft as if it's this other mystical kind of thing, or it's complete nonsense. But then at the same time, they'll be doing blood rituals by like asking for the blood of Jesus to wash over them and like in a time of trial. And it's like that is magic. That's
right,
you're
it's like,
engaging,
okay, so
you're
you realize that you're doing
yeah,
magic, right?
yeah, and it's like and the apostles when they wanted to have more people to come into their fold, they cast the bones to
Right,
read the runes.
right.
When Jesus says, "Hey, you don't if you don't know the words, here is a set of instructions of what to say
Uh,
as you break bread
AKA
and as you do
spell,
these." Yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah, and it's like you're it's just named something completely different, and the
yeah.
name is what people have decided is scary. But it's like you're doing the same set of organized structure to talk to a higher power. It's just one is like ooh scary, and the other one is approved by the government.
You know what? That would make a great speech in the mouth of like a character in a horror film that,
Mhm.
that you should write, or at least write that story, or I will, you know,
Yeah,
if I
somebody.
can borrow that one, because
Sure, absolutely.
it is so, I mean, I love one of the things I love, 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 even though it's a cliche now, is meta horror. And
Hmm.
really, which started out the extremely problematic cannibal Holocaust, which is, actually, if you just ignore and the animal stuff, but it's actually a brilliant film, in my opinion. And it kind of talks about things like colonialism and
Yeah.
I mean, it's really actually really, really, really good. So, um, what's my point? So, with meta horror, like we wouldn't have Blair Witch Project without Cannibal Holocaust. We also have like the Scream movies, which were
Yeah.
extremely meta, and then the uh, well, now it's become a cliche. So I'm trying to like do meta, like where in my universe, meta is the norm.
Yeah. So
right.
you gotta double down.
Exactly. So I'm adding dimensions to like Candy Fontaine is already a meta character. She's already a cliche on top of a cliche. She's like the the most she's just like she's Harley Quinn. She's
Mhm.
insane. She's a badass. She's a killer, and she's morally depraved. And she'll just one of her frequent solutions when she's tired of a conversation is she will shoot somebody in the head, and then just
Yeah.
blast their head off and drink their blood like it's not a thing.
Yeah. Oh, just a day in the life.
It's a day. It's a and so I think I really have this strong intimation that it's going to be the character that people will remember me by.
Yeah.
It just seems like it has such a because I don't think we've ever seen this character before. We've seen versions of it, but Harley Quinn is almost a approaches a meta character of this kind. But this is
Right.
sort of, but still, what I didn't like, I'm babbling, I'm sorry.
You're good.
Okay,
You're
okay,
good. No,
so,
but it's yeah, it kind of reminds me of Stephen Graham Jones' Indian Lake trilogy,
oh
where
yeah,
the main character, she's obsessed with horror movies.
yeah,
To the point to like when she realizes in the first book when she realizes that her obsession with horror movies has allowed her to see that there is a serial killer hiding in the town, and she tries to convince people of that. People start going, well, you sure know a lot about horror. Are we sure that you're not,
right.
Jade, are we sure it's not you? And she's like, no, I promise it's not me. And so she has to use her knowledge of horror movies to trap the killer.
I love that.
It's very fun, yeah.
I
But
love that. I
yeah,
love that.
it's definitely
Yeah,
a genre, the meta horror.
the meta horror, and then there was a number of books that people like Jack Ketchum and the late Jack Ketchum and Edward Lee did
Mhm.
like look with there was sort of like have five authors and it was extremely meta. There was some like nine strip something road or iron strip road or something like that. And
Mhm.
I didn't know him well, but I knew um Ed Lee, and he's a really he's a really cool cat. His stories are just I don't see how anybody could not find them hilarious.
Yeah.
I mean they're supposed to be funny. I think
Yeah,
really,
I think that's the appeal is
yeah,
a lot you can have a lot of fun with horror and a lot of jokes with it.
yeah.
Like really like be self-aware.
Be self-aware. I would love to have you on board with. Okay, so there's several anthologies that you are very welcome to submit to. Now, one of them is called Omaha Kali to the Goddess,
Uh-huh.
and it's not limited to Indian stuff. I mean, we do have permission from Billy Martin you know, to publish, um, Calcutta Lord of Nerves, and then we have original stuff from like I think Ron Whitehead and a number of, you know, great poets and authors. But it's basically just like if you like that whole thing, the goddess thing, it could be any kind of feminine power, nature spirit, or it can be a bad guy or whatever. It's just as long as it's addresses that, the goddess trope. And that's
Okay, cool.
okay. And then of course a collective paw, which
Yes.
we're getting and knock on wood, whatever it either happens or it doesn't. But Jonathan Mayberry said he was going to write an original Joe Ledger story
Ooh,
just
cool.
for me, right? So,
That's cool.
oh,
Yeah.
Jonathan Mayberry, please, please, I'm still holding my breath with him.
Right.
When he came on board the Clive Barker book, that's another one, the Clive Barker anthology. Um,
Hmm.
do you like Clive Barker?
I do. Yeah.
Okay,
I've
so
slowly started getting into his stuff. So yeah,
okay,
I've got like such a huge like TBR shelf that I'm like, okay, we need to get in. We need to get into some of the originals.
so that one's a lot of fun. To quote my friend Jonathan Mabry, I can't believe I'm saying this. Okay, Jonathan Mabry, please actually don't try to cancel me or listen to some of my enemies. Please just be cool and oh my God. So anyway, it either happens or it doesn't, but he told me
Right.
he would. He's also going to be on the show. And so we have okay, so as far as original work, we have like Maitland McDonough, who's a famous film critic, and basically she's a friend of Clive Barker and Dario Argento. She and Clive,
Yeah.
like bonded over their mutual admiration for Dario Argento. We have original work in the works by Jasper Bark, Splatterpunk Award winner, um, Lawrence Soares, also a Bram Stoker Award winner, who's in A Collective Paw. Um, Paul M. Salmon, who wrote the definitive work on Blade Runner,
Nice.
right? Future Noir, The Making of Blade Runner. He has also edited a Splatterpunk's Extreme Horror and its follow-up, Splatterpunk's 2 Over the Edge. And he's contributed original work to me for the Black Sabbath book. I don't know how you feel about music. You know, the Bowie thing is still, you could still get in something.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to if you email me all of that stuff because it's
Yeah,
gonna like the moment like I start to do because I'm about to feed my pets. So the moment I do that, it's like it'll fall out my head.
yeah, sure. Yeah,
So
I
so
will.
yeah, but yeah,
And
definitely email. It all sounds great. It's got like
yeah,
you already have a great table of content
it is.
group going. So
And it is, and it's like we have an original piece coming up from Caitlin R. Kiernan themselves,
okay,
like
cool.
about collaborating with Clive Barker, which
That's
is
cool.
the, I mean, it's if it doesn't win, like if it doesn't sweep the all the awards, I'm just gonna have some words with Ellen Datlow. But seriously though, it's
Yeah.
just like it's so much fun to do this, and it's a joyous community, and I want you to be able to feed your pets, so I'm gonna sort of okay, round this off. How do people get in touch with Abigail Taylor?
Well, you can find me on my website,
Okay,
which is abigailftaylour.wordpress.com.
okay,
You can find me on Twitter and on Blue Sky as Abigail F. Taylor. It's all lowercase. And then on TikTok as Tall Tales Abigail. Like
okay.
tales as in stories, not tales as in critters.
Oh yeah, but oh wow. Oh
But
yeah.
it could work as well because I have a lot of tall tales over here in this
Do,
house.
do, do you do you have any? I mean, you would have a few months or whatever, but do you have any idea like what you want to write about for a collective paw too?
No, I would have to I'd have to sit down and see like kind of more like hone in on what I want to do. I have like a lot of animal stories, but I don't know like do you want like horror or feel good chicken soup of the
Well,
soul or
it's interesting because so what it is again, just reference for the peoples. Okay, so a collective paw and animal rights anthology, volume one. What I'm trying to do is take all of these badass, I mean, if anybody, if whoever's read Exquisite Corpse or Lost Souls, and be like, wow, Billy Martin is actually kind of Billy Martin is a small, furry man.
Yeah.
He's a small furry man, right? And he's disabled. So, give him a squeezins. Um, I'm sorry, but I'm just full of, that I don't know how to be angry at people. So anyway, um, so these people are also their reputation is formidable and they're totally badass, right? What I
Right.
again, I love the whole idea that we're all kind of, you know, connected through our relationships with other creatures,
Hmm.
and that it's that this, as Thomas M. Malafarina, said recently to me, because he was talking about his pets, he said they're like nice little people.
Yeah, they
It's like
are.
it's like what a great thing to say. And so I'm going to call it, the subtitle will be, a collective paw to nice little people, right?
I like that. Yeah.
And and so yeah, so
Sorry.
you need to go,
Sorry.
and I will, because I know how animals can get. So
Yeah, they're
um,
starting.
they'll
They're
gang
starting
up
to
on
be
you, man.
little.
And then they will, like, they're that they're practicing to eat your face when you die, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. I've told I actually have a short story in the haunted house anthology, charity anthology from Voices of the Mausoleum
Oh
about
wow.
well, it's about gentrification, but it opens up with a cat lady who's being devoured by her cats.
Nice.
So
Do you
and
ever
it's like we know when we adopt them, we
yeah,
hope that they would enjoy the bountiful flesh that we
the,
give them
the
when we choke
bountiful
them when
flesh.
they
Um,
die.
do you ever follow that Ask a Mortician channel?
Yes, yeah, I've
He's
seen it.
great,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
So
like
yeah,
that.
with this, dogs I love and cats I love, but with cats I know that it's not how much they love you, it's just if they're gonna kill you last, you know. So
Right,
like
yeah,
we're
yeah.
on the chopping block on cats, but
It's actually
yeah,
it's actually really wholesome that they're always practicing. And
yeah,
if they were, the proper, like, tiger size, then they would just, like, they wouldn't wait to eat your face,
right,
you know.
exactly.
But it's kind of charming how they're always practicing, to whatever their
Yeah,
moves, like they're, so okay, my friend. So really a lot of fun, and to have you on, and I certainly look forward to, working with you. And so
yeah,
okay,
I was happy to be on and thank you for inviting me to be part of the anthology. And yeah, I'm
of
looking
course.
forward to doing that as well.
And tell all your friends
I
about
will.
this. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. You take care.
Thanks, you too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.